meeting, which is very appropriate.
Thanks all of you for coming this evening. Here's some poems I've written. I want to thank Dickinson State University too, and especially the Heart River Writers Circle for the invitation. It's an honor and a pleasure to have this opportunity. So the poems that I'm going to read tonight are part of a collection I've been working on intermittently for a little more than 10 years. At that time, 10 years ago, I set out to write some poems that were different from ones that I'd written before. Plain-spoken poems that reflected my experience working for Dakota Resource Council and interacting with its members and others living here in rural western North Dakota. And the project sat idle for several years through the latter part of the last decade. But earlier this year, I started to write some new poems that reflected some of the changes that have taken place here in my adopted home area. And it's my intention to finish these poems and collect them and publish them, hopefully, within the next year or so. So I'm going to read some of them now. I'm going to start with some of the older ones. This one is called Directions. Go out past the old Hardys and what used to be the farmer's elevator. Follow the two-lane. Watch out for deer. About 12 miles out, you will come to a yard full of old oil trucks and other junk by a good gravel road. That's not it. A few miles more, past the old Hagen place, the one with 3 grain bins and one falling over, turn east where they're tearing the school down. It used to be County Road 14. Now I think it's 115th Street Southwest, like we lived in Chicago or somewhere. 4 miles east, 2 north, 3 east, 1 south, 2 east. You can't miss it. We're the only ones out here. So I'm not from out here. I've been here for 19 years now. Before that, I lived most of my life in 2 large cities, Minneapolis and Denver. It took a while for a city boy, but I made this place my home. I think the turning point came when I was visiting some people northeast of Belfield in connection with my work with DRC. Well, when we finished, I wanted to go see another DRC member that I'd never had a chance to meet before. And I called him up and asked him for directions. He lived up somewhere west of Manning. And he kind of stuttered for a minute, and then his guidance was, well, look, there was a guy who planted some spruce trees. I found him. I found him. And at that point I felt as though I could say I was from here, at least in a sort of a qualified way. So here's another poem with a geographical title. It's the title that I'm using as a working title for the collection. It's called West of Town. Bjelland has arranged 17 tractors along the driveway west of town, all built before DDT was outlawed and parity turned into welfare. Like a stalled 4th of July parade, they inch toward the pavement that used to be a prairie trail. The door to the shed behind them is always closed. My friend Arnie, who quit farming after they changed the farm bill, says every farmstead along this highway looks like an estate sale waiting to happen. Arnie spends his time scouring the plains in search of grain trucks that don't run, but help him remember when he could make a living farming, and might be bought for less than collectors would pay. He must have driven by Bjelland's place hundreds of times. We're all waiting to see what will happen. In the end, someone will sift through the leavings, heirs from Phoenix or Seattle cleaning up the home place after dad's coronary or mom's Alzheimer's, every feed trough and percolator a decision. I like the Trechock for its forward backwardness, like a cowboy striding into a Fargo bar. I'm still what I used to be, it says. I've come to town to sell my calves, but don't expect me to like it. So this collection has some recurring characters. One of them is Arnie. You'll hear more from him later. I came to Dickinson to work for Dakota Resource Council in 1993, and that organization, and I'm proud to say my successor as directors here, Don Morrison, I'll hold up your hand. Also, because I'm still a member of this group, and also our chair of our board of directors, Earl Reineke, appropriately, as usual, has a cowboy hat. So DRC is less of an institution than it is like a bunch of people, most of them living out in rural areas, who call this place home, who want to stay here, and who want it to be a good place to live. And what I've gotten to know from those people is really both the inspiration and the raw material of these poems. Those who populate this area and who populate the poems that I've been writing, in many ways cut against the grain of some very powerful trends in this country. And the next poem is kind of about that. It's called East and West. Coal trains sometimes wake me up at night, their brakes wailing as they slow through town. Freighted with coal for Minnesota power plants, soon they clatter back for more like empty buckets. The freeway runs east and west a few miles north, carrying semi-loads of wheat for bread and breakfast cereal. Even the wind goes east and west here, delivering mountain coal to the pothole farms, bringing back manure and moans from the sales ring. Out at the national park last fall, I saw some geese laboring across the flow of commerce, following the Little Missouri to its source and beyond toward the ruins of Spain's vanished empire. The paupers thought, we too must abandon our settlements, give the place back to the buffalo for safekeeping, and obey the east-west tug of our national heart. But the darkness, south and north of town, weightless and persistent as a goose quill, still pulls the occasional probing headlights that work their way up the section line, like a cowboy keeping the fences strung tight. So this part of the world has been in transition for some time, at the very least, ever since the Europeans came and showed up here, and that wasn't all that long ago. But likely before that too. It's a land of migration and transition. Now we're in the midst of a new transition. I'm not sure any of us knows for sure how this will play out. There'll be more about that later, but here's another poem that came into being as a result of looking at some old photos. Surely some of you have done the same thing and thinking about how things change. This is called Family Album. Skull circle on the hip of her jeans, the woman who inherited the farm with calluses and broken nails, showed me the photos from the 20s. Mountain pines, a picnic basket, a Model T, 3 women in flapper dresses, 2 men with dark suits and straw hats. She looked up from the album. I followed her blue eyeshadowed gaze past the Dust Bowl windbreak to her alfalfa field. And she said they kind of look familiar, the way they smile. Like they must be related on my father's side. Damned if I know who they are. She found them under the feed receipts in the mudroom where her boots stood, caked with the dirt of the homestead and waiting for the evening heifer check. I wonder if her heirs will remember her when they come home from their jobs at the nursing home and the fertilizer plant and tear open the rent check and the utility bill. Will they remember the 8-cent hogs, the LDP payments, and the fields sold off to the 10,000-acre boys and their air seeders? What will they say about the quarter section up at Freedom Township next to the substation and the foreign-sounding names in the family Bible? Will they recognize her in the wedding picture tucked into the first chapter of Genesis? You know, when I moved here in 1993, this seemed like a lonely, down-at-the-heels kind of place, frankly. And so some of these poems may reflect thoughts and moods that may no longer seem current. Now it seems like everyone in the country who's looking for a job and a new start is converging on the oil patch and hoping it will fix them somehow. But I think the memory of hard times continues even during the boom, along with the fear of being used and cast aside again. Nothing persists like unfulfilled hopes and the feeling of abandonment. So here's a poem about a kind of loss and abandonment. It's called Sacred Ground. All that's left of St. Cyril's is a bell tower and stairway, a door the color of muscatel, and a clapboard wall white as a host. A girl about 10 skipped through the shingles, scattered like giant flakes of soot up the hillside, toward the dead, arranged in rows like an audience, while her father pulled nails from the disassembled roof. Frowning like a biblical soldier removing a corpse from a cross, he wanted the hardwood for flooring, but now it doesn't look like it will pay. Carpenters take things apart here and build nothing. The newest buildings are metal pole barns and granaries. From the churchyard, I couldn't see a single occupied home. It's hard to know what to believe on the Great Plains. Rain never followed the plow as the experts promised. Wheat prices never got better after the war, and now the pasta cooperative buys from Canada. The German-Russians couldn't follow the Irish priest's sermons, and now there are hardly any priests left at all. One of the buttes to the north was sacred to several tribes, but now it's pumped for oil. Good luck, I told the demolition man. I don't think either of us knew what that might mean. Well, even in the boom times that we have now, there are places in western North Dakota that can still seem like a pretty lonely place, and I think some of the loneliest places are around coal mines, which still lie outside the heavy rural population growth that we're seeing, and are places where whole rural communities have really been obliterated. One of my other recurring characters shows up in this poem, which is called Longitude. Driving the section line just east of his place, Coleman said, if you could just keep on driving to the same longitude in the other hemisphere, you'd end up near the Russia-Mongolia border. Instead, you have to turn when you come to the mine. There, either way, you pass abandoned farmsteads, some evidenced only by groves of ash, that mark the unpacking from one migration and the mustering of provisions for the next. Coleman's grandfather came over from Russia after his grandfather moved there from Germany. His great mustache, like a blanket drawn up under his nose, looks out now like a sentinel from this photograph in the parlor. Coleman's own children have all left the state. The mine will eventually own his land. Driving south from his section line, you look east at the first quarter that was stripped for electricity that switched on televisions in 1976. The land beyond the no trespassing signs spreads out to the east, empty and unbroken, like a Russian steppe waiting for a German and a plow. So like a lot of people who are trying to write poetry in our century and the previous one, I used to write a lot of poems in which the personal pronoun I was really the main character. It was all about me. And I wrote so many of them that I just about got so tired of myself and my own peculiar opinions and observations, I wanted to scream. So I haven't completely exiled the word I from this collection of poems, but that I'm working on. But for the most part, the I in these poems is more of an observer than an actor, and I'm generally pleased with that outcome. Many of the poems where I am a more active character are poems that don't take place, whose action doesn't take place right here, and especially that relate to Latin America. I suppose it's a good question why there should be any poems about Latin America at all in a collection of poems by a North Dakotan about North Dakota, except that rural North Dakota really reminded me of Mexico when I came here. The way it looked. And you know, the other fact is I love Latin America, and as alluded to earlier, and sometimes think of Western North Dakota as just kind of a distant extension of Chihuahua. And besides that, I think of rural people all over the world being linked together by their relationship to the land. When I was courting my amazingly radiant and fearless bride, Janine Nichols, the first place I wanted to take her was Chihuahua, so we could go see the Copper Canyon, which we did. And when I first sat down to plan my retirement with my, my financial advisor here in town, Leon Vetter, he asked me to picture myself in retirement. What would it be like? And I said, well, I pictured myself riding on a bus in rural Guatemala, sitting next to a woman with a chicken on her lap. That wasn't what he expected. So this poem is actually about an encounter with just such a woman. Coleman's lentils. Shopping at the market in Antigua, Guatemala, I stopped at the stall of a woman selling tomatoes, 5 kinds of peppers, cantaloupe, and pineapples. She beamed and pronounced their English names carefully as someone tasting a new recipe. She said she grew the peppers and tomatoes herself on less than a hectare up near Encuentros, and asked me to describe the farming of North Dakota. I looked around in vain for something the size of a combine. Told her about the flax fields blooming blue to the horizon, the flaming yellow canola and sunflowers, the snow-covered stubble, and the 4 o'clock sunset. I can't explain a farm bill in English, much less Spanish, and despaired of convincing that all gringo farmers weren't rich. Finally, I remembered Coleman's lentils. He told me he tried them last year and made money. They beat up his machinery, but he planted them again. I told him how I cooked them up some weekends in a big pot with a lamb neck bone and rosemary. He made a face and said he never tasted them. He preferred meat and potatoes, neither of which he raised. The woman threw back her head and shook it, laughing. Gringos are rich, her eyes said. Rich but crazy. Although the work of farmers may be seen, I suppose, as repetitive and traditional, I've come to the conclusion that farmers are really, by nature, innovators, or at least the best farmers are. It's a struggle for survival, not only when it comes to price and hence income, but also when it comes to conserving and building the raw materials of the farm, which is essentially soil and water. So here's Arnie again, thinking out loud about farming. This poem is called Grass and Black Baldies. The grass, greener than we could remember, and rippling like a bodybuilder's deltoids, keeping a firm hold on the unbroken topsoil. Arnie and I drove down from the Slim Buttes in front of a northwest wind. Ground squirrel dashed in front of us toward the center line, then spun around on its haunches and retreated for cover. If I had it to do over again, Arnie said, I'd put the farm all into grass and stick with black baldies. Work more at selling local, auction off the combine and seeder, maybe raise a few horses, maybe some goats. Better to go broke with meat than wheat. Fewer meetings to go to, less chemical, and less bad advice from the extension service. Miles and miles of grass lay swaying around us. Some black baldies and their spring calves to the east. Beyond them, a half-dozen pronghorn almost out of eyesight. Arnie said nothing for a long time. But out here, there was no one to disagree with me. So I'm going to read a couple of poems here from, now that we found out what the future is bringing, as broad, I'm going to read a few poems that I've written more recently this year. The first one brings back the unnamed woman who inherited the farm from an earlier poem. And another recurring character that I didn't read a poem with him in it before is a fellow named Jay, who earlier appears as a bird watcher in an earlier poem. And the name of this poem is Dead Ducks. Out moving cattle to the south pasture, the woman who inherited the farm also took possession of a mallard drake waddling under a coat of oily slime. Must have took a reserve pit for a pond, she said. I hate to see a critter suffer more than I hate to fish and game. She cleaned it up and fed it in the shop. And let it go the next day, live or die. It flew. Not before her sister took her picture with it on her cell phone. The county paper ran it the next Friday. Now they'll make me a tree hugger, she moaned. Before this boom ends, I told Jay, a lot more ranchers may be hugging trees. Jay's long-term weather outlook is stuck on global warming for generations, with daily natural disasters of burning or freezing depending on the direction of the ocean currents. More likely, we'll all be dead ducks, he said. Here's some more with Jay. This is called Prophecy. North of the lake, the Colossus of oil holds aloft a fireball of gas, like an Olympic torch wafting sulfur to salute the record-breaking pumpers. Midnight, the truck's still rumbling, down the two-lane past Lakeview wrecking, where their final resting place awaits. Gas flares in the distance like untended bonfires, 6, no, 7 to the west. No time to let our gaze linger as we roll through the diesel-powered traffic past the Colossus and its eternal flame. Sudden headlights appear in our lane. Down from the crest of the hill, we slow and descend to the gravel shoulder like subjects curtsying in obeisance. At the end of the Bible, says Jay, who was schooled in King James Apocalyptic, it says, night will be no more.